everyone. Welcome to News and Brews Sports Biz, where we tap into the latest in college athletics and advocate for the financial voices in the industry. I'm Katie Davis.
And I'm Ken Kurtzel. Last week, we wrapped up part 3 of our webinar series, Strategies for Success in a Changing Athletics Landscape. In the first 2 sessions, we heard from Power 4 and a group of 5 athletic directors. If you've been following along, you know we've recapped those in previous podcast episodes. Today, we're diving into highlights from the final session, which featured a great panel of FCS and mid-major athletic directors. Colin Hargis from Florida Gulf Coast University, Laurel Hosmer at Valparaiso, and Marvin Lewis from George Mason.
And joining us to recap the webinar is our colleague, Jim Booz, who moderated the panelists and did a great job, by the way. Jim got the conversation started by setting the stage with the latest of current events happening in college athletics. Jim, why don't you reset the stage for our listeners here?
Yeah, thanks, Katie and Ken. Good to be back with you guys here. Yeah, as we were preparing for the webinar, going back a couple of months, we targeted, April 9th intentionally with the House, case settlement hearing scheduled for April 7th. And then also sort of, at the conclusion of the basketball championship seasons for men's and women's basketball also, on that Sunday and Monday as well. And so really excited about the opportunity, on that Wednesday to kind of really talk about, coming out of the House case hearing and preparing for the decision that Judge Wilkin, we all had anticipated, making that day. And then, sort of a day or so leading up to the 7th, everybody was beginning to kind of get word a little bit that, Judge Wilkin likely may not be making, a final decision on that Monday. And I think that piqued everyone's interest even more so if it could have been even more interesting. So obviously there was a lot of interest in that. I don't know if anybody tried to log in to listen to the hearing that day, but I think her Zoom platform allowed, I think, a maximum of 1,000 listeners, and that thing filled up really, really fast early in the day. But fortunately, I was able to listen and kind of get the scoop as it was happening. And to I think a lot of people's, I don't want to say dismay, but maybe a little bit of disappointment, she didn't render a final decision. And I know a lot of institutions, a lot of interested parties were hoping for a final decision on that day. But she did indicate that she feels like it's a good settlement, but there are a couple of things that she still would like to see the attorneys representing both parties to still try to work through a little bit. And those 2 really main features there, surround the ability for future class representatives to be considered and whether they're going to be able to opt in if and when they enroll at an institution and participate. And then also one of the things that's garnered a lot of attention leading up to this is the limits on roster sizes. And
Right.
while that's a really I think compelling position that she took to really encourage, again, the attorneys for both parties to kind of go back and look at that and see if there might be a way to kind of soften that blow a little bit to those individuals and maybe possibly grandfather in some roster limits. And while that's I think a very compassionate position from the bench, I know it's caused a little bit more consternation among some individuals and institutions that have already made, kind of decisions and communicated some of those decisions to individuals about them not having a spot this coming academic year. And so that's kind of created additional concern when they feel like they have no more capacity for new concerns at this point. But more to come in that. She did ask for an update from both sides within a week, and so obviously that'll be on on Monday the 14th. Just here, coming up. So looking forward to that and seeing if we can get some closure and kind of get some at least a little bit more consistent regulations moving into the upcoming academic year in 25-26.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like, unfortunately, just one more curveball here towards what we were hoping was, some level of resolution in the end of this process. And, I think everybody, like you said, is they're just ready to step forward, I think, into what the proposed House settlement, the landscape that it creates. So, but it's another week of waiting, and we'll see where it takes us next. Jim, what were just looking into, by the way, as Katie mentioned, just a great group you brought together with Laurel, Marvin, and Colin there. I was impressed by all three of them. What was maybe a top takeaway as you were listening to the group, as they really kind of talked through, okay, what this changing landscape looks like at this size institution, what hit you most? Either a common theme that they all had, or some unique aspects that each one of them might have had individually.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I really enjoyed getting their insights as well. And one of the things that I think hit me, the difference between obviously their level and the Power Four level is seismic, right? But there's
Right.
even a difference between um, institutions at that level as well, right? And I think we had a pretty good mix of a larger, type
Right.
institution in George Mason, from an enrollment perspective, and then Florida Gulf Coast is a little bit smaller, but still a relatively large, ish student body. I think around 15 or 16,000 students, and then Valparaiso, as Laurel mentioned, is a very small institution with a student body of around 2,500 to 3,000 students, and so there are significant differences there even amongst that group. But one of the I think the common themes among all of them was that how significant the role of college athletics plays on their campus, and that wasn't as surprising to me. But what maybe stuck out a little bit is the importance of basketball at that level, where
Right.
at others it's the sort of emphasis clearly is on football and the success there because of the amount of revenue that it brings in. But even Valparaiso, who has a football program, but as Laurel mentioned, they're Division III non-scholarship program, and so they still want to be very competitive and successful in that sport. The bread and butter for their institutions is the sport of men's basketball, and the priority that they have there. And I think it was Marvin who I think aptly put it was, college athletics, the athletic department is not only sort of the front porch at those institutions, but it's the heartbeat, right? And I think that was really well said and kind of poignant from Marvin's perspective.
Yeah, and I know that Marvin highlighted some of the studies that were done after George Mason's huge run that one year in the tournament, just some of the economic impact to the university, the value of the media,
Mm-hmm.
how it affected enrollment and applications and all that. So yeah, just kind of really all three of them, yeah, the men's basketball side was a big thing. Katie, any extra thoughts from you, or anything around that, or other
Yeah.
big takeaways that you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim said it well, and I think, something else that, they said, I mean, two of the three have indicated they're planning to opt in, both Florida Gulf Coast and George Mason. Valpo is still undecided, but they see it as an opportunity. And, we talk about this a lot about, fear-based decisions versus
Mm-hmm.
strategic, like opportunity-based decisions. And I think schools at that level see it as an opportunity because they've seen when they've had those moments and blips of success and what that has meant from a national marketing, branding, outreach for the entire institution. And, if they can sustain that and replicate that more than once every 20 years, can you just imagine what that means for the institution as a whole, from enrollment, fan engagement, alumni continued engagement, and with both George Mason and Florida Gulf Coast are fairly young universities, and it was funny because I think George Mason, they talked about when that run happened, they were in their, they called it low 30s. So the
Yeah.
institution was
Hmm.
about 30 years old at that time. And that was over 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago. And so, they're still a fairly young institution. And so for it to really springboard their enrollment, even in a time of enrollment cliff, shows what it can do for athletics. And, Florida Gulf Coast is a lot younger. I think they indicated their average alumni age is 35 years old. So,
Hmm.
that's something that they can really tap into, because those alumni are now starting to probably get really set in their careers and have disposable income that they can contribute to the institution and continue to grow that um history and brand of that institution. So I love to see that they're approaching it as an opportunity and more positive outlook, and they're institution wide are kind of looking at it that way, versus just this fear-based strategies and decision making that's happening, and especially in Power Four, but even in Group of Five, just fear of being left behind in the next
Yeah.
round of realignment or mergers or spinoffs or whatever's going to happen. So to me, it's kind of refreshing a little bit to see it in that light and hear their perspective on that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And yeah, all three had a very positive outlook, really, I think, for how this can be used to again, further their institutions. It was definitely a learning lesson for me hearing from Marvin talk about George. I didn't realize George Mason was that young of an institution, actually. So that was really interesting to hear. And just, again, looking at how that helped springboard them, towards really, as he mentioned, being the largest public institution in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which was pretty notable. So, in looking at how athletics uh, played such a key part in then getting to that stage and that size, and then, yeah, Colin, kind of pointing out, well, for Florida Gulf Coast, the age of their average age of their alumni base, and really how many of them stay in their local area, in the Fort Myers area, and what that impact can have, again, to the institution and their fundraising, both for athletics as well as other areas. Jim, any other big thoughts that the webinar brought out for you?
I think it really it reminded me of how challenging of a position athletic directors are at institutions that size. They are, as Laurel and Colin mentioned a little bit, talking about their recent women's basketball search. Like, they're looking and trying to hire leaders to run, and a very competitive program at a really important time. And they don't have, obviously, a lot of financial resources, which leads to they don't have a lot of human resources to rely on. And so, you know, it just reminded me of kind of how challenging it is, and how I think proud they should be. And I'm sure there are a number of other athletic directors at similar situated institutions, how proud they ought to be of the jobs that they're doing. Because I know, like, the coaches that coach there, the players that play there, they care as much or more about their success as coaches and student athletes at the Power Four level. And they just don't have the resources, but they care as much, they work as hard, and they ought to be really proud of the jobs that they do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, how they define success is different. And, both Laurel and Colin, when you ask them about, just going through a head coaching search in this time of uncertainty, and, what they were kind of looking for, and, in their new head coaches. And, they talked a lot about alignment with values, and, culture, and it was not about transactions. And so
That's right.
I
Yeah.
think that's, something, and something else Laurel said that stuck with me is they're an and school. And,
Yeah.
if you ask a Twitter attorney, student athlete is a four-letter word, because they're just athletes, but no, they are students. They are college students who are playing a sport. And so, Laurel really said, they're athlete and, I play football and I'm getting a degree in
Right.
engineering, that kind of thing. And so I thought that was really, refreshing to hear as well. And a good reminder. And then Marvin even brought up, in their, men's and women's basketball, is about 30 student athletes of their total 500.
Right.
So when you think of the ones that they're thinking of from a rev share standpoint, that's 30 out of 500, tops, right? So like the
Yeah.
rest of them just want that traditional experience. And he talked about how he's just really grounded in thinking through, those reminders that they just want that traditional college athlete experience and they're not looking for money. And that's a good reminder that that's the case at all levels, not just this level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There are a lot more of those student athletes in institutions than there are at the Power Four level.
yes.
Yeah, so I think that's a great reminder to step back and and I think a lot of people in the a lot of our listeners, a lot of people in the industry know it, but then it still is just a good reminder of like, okay, for as much attention as football and men's basketball get, and the dollars that they're looking at spending in those areas under this new era, it's a minority of the actual number of student athletes that they have, and just the importance of what that means to their institutions, for the majority of the other athletes that are kind of out of the spotlight, as we kind of spend so much time focusing on where we're going and around those two big sports. So
I had a call recently with an athletic director at an institution that's very similar to those that we spoke with on the webinar. And, this person mentioned to me there is a non-football institution as well. And while they're going obviously all in on men's and women's basketball in rev share and NIL and those things, they're only in a position to pay maybe six men's basketball players and maybe six women's basketball players, right? And so that kind of, I think, is more of the norm, right, across the entire population of student athletes and institutions than what the headlines indicate. And so I think, again, it's just a good reminder that a lot of people are still doing this because they love the opportunity to compete and get an education.
no, that's a great point, and you're right. Even with that, you're right. They're going to pay five or six of those players on a 13 14 person roster, so even
Right,
there, a majority of that roster is still going to be the more traditional student athlete that we're thinking of, that is not not there for the rev share necessarily.
correct.
Yeah.
And even
uh,
so, that might still make a huge impact, for them in the tournament because
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
if the other schools are really focused on, doubling down on football, that could really move the dial for them. And that's what they need, right? They need more
Right.
opportunities to have that Cinderella moment, so that
Yeah.
it can continue to get their brand out there and elevate them.
Yeah, and I think, taking a step aside, obviously the men's basketball tournament just finished up this last week also. And even as you look there, yes, the Power Four conferences, did great and they were well represented. And obviously Florida winning at a Power Four SEC school. But you look at that team and it's, you know, looking at the number of unranked recruits on that team that didn't have a bunch of stars coming out. I mean, I think it does show that, okay, yes, even some of these smaller schools that might have a lower dollar amount allocated as part of the new era than a lot of the Power Four or the Big East schools that have some pretty big budgets for basketball. there's great opportunity. I think even, there can be a disparity in what they're spending, and then still, you managing your program well, and getting the right recruits in that really work well together. I won't be surprised to see some of the smaller dollar schools continue to have outsized impact in the tournament going forward.
I agree. And I think, to what what both Colin and Laurel said about even their recent coaching searches and what they were looking for, it was focused on, like I said, values, alignment, culture,
Yep,
and teamwork makes the dream work still. It's not just
exactly.
show me the money. So,
Yep,
it's going to be a little bit of both in this landscape, obviously, but it's, definitely possible. And yes, comparing Florida to the Florida Gulf Coast is not apples to
Mm.
apples, but
no,
comparing
not at all.
Florida to the other Power Four that were in the tournament or maybe not in the tournament, it really showed that they could stretch the dollar
Yep,
because they have that culture and that teamwork and that young coach that's hungry for just success that's not a transactional based success.
yep, absolutely. It's a fun and interesting and scary time right now, as we navigate this, and again wait for Judge Wilkin and some some finality, hopefully, to the House case. Any other thoughts for our listeners, Jim, before we talk about the important part of brews here eventually?
It's a lot of times on campuses. The end of basketball season really only means now that there's probably less media attention given to sport programs, at least between now and say late summer, early fall when football is ramping back up. But it's still a really busy time on those campuses because there are a number of other sports that are still participating that don't get the attention and obviously aren't getting a lot of NIL deals and things of that nature. But I still know that they're really busy on those campuses today, and I just really want to again thank publicly Marvin, Colin, and Laurel for making the time at a really busy time of year to join us on the webinar.
Definitely, definitely. And Katie, any other great thoughts as we sit here in early April?
Yeah, I mean, I think just adding on to what Jim said, appreciate their time, but also knowing we see you guys because it is busy and the
Yeah.
clock is ticking to July 1 and you still don't have answers. And so,
Mm.
we know that sucks, and we plan to keep monitoring it and putting information out there, as things progress. So, hopefully when you listen this time next month, we'll have a little bit more clarity that we can share our perspective on.
Yep, that's great. And any great drinks that you've enjoyed lately? Katie, want to kick us off?
So last month, we were invited up to University of Illinois to attend their final home men's basketball game, and had some meetings with athletics, some business related meetings too, but um, got to try one of their brews from a collective that's branded. It's called ILL by Distill Brewing, and it was good. It not my favorite IPA, but some of those IPAs I've had are hard to top. But it was still very good. But it was probably the most fun I've had drinking an IPA because we just had the best time. It was great company, a great game day atmosphere, and a great end to their regular season men's basketball as well. So had a blast, and just can't thank them enough for showing us a wonderful time when we were there.
That sounds awesome. And yeah, I watched that game, and it was, yeah, you caught an amazing end of the regular season for Illinois. That was a great home game they had there. So, Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I'd have to probably go right now with the Sweetwater 420. Their pale ale is something that I've enjoyed recently. kind of as the seasons are beginning to turn and something a little bit, lighter and refreshing. I've always enjoyed that.
Yep, that's a good solid choice, from a good Atlanta-based brewery. So, well, I was visiting a client up in Raleigh earlier this week, and those who've listened before know how much I love Burial Brewing, which is based out of North Carolina and has a Raleigh tap house. So while I did enjoy some Burial, we went out to a restaurant brewery called Brewery Bavana, which is unique in that they do some amazing craft brewing while also paired with, just very outstanding Chinese food. So which to me goes perfectly well. I think beer and Chinese is a great combination, and I've never really seen it done the way this place does it. So we enjoyed that very much also.
I would have never thought beer and Chinese, but I thought it was good.
Yeah, no, it works good. A little bit of the spiciness and the beer. Yeah, good combo.
Well, good. Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We will continue sharing more as things continue to progress, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
To learn more about the James Moore & Company Collegiate Athletics and Higher Education segments, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to sign up for Insights to get our latest industry updates, news, and events delivered straight to your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at JMCO Higher Ed and on LinkedIn for the latest news as the landscape of collegiate athletics and higher education is continually evolving.